evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's now 5:30, and I call this work session of the Burnsville City Council to order. The city clerk, please note that for the record, Mayor Couch is absent. We'll go right to item 1, which is our 2020 budget discussion. Kelly Stry, our finance director, is presenting. Ms. Stry, please.
Thank you. I'm happy to present our budget detail. This is the first meeting, that work session that we go over the budget detail. You've had your workbooks. You've had several budget meetings to date already where you've discussed priorities and set the max tax. And so we are coming up to the final meetings. We also have set aside a work session November 26th if it's necessary. We're hoping to get through everything tonight, but if you have things that you want to further discuss as a council, that work session is available. And then the next council meeting is Tuesday, December 3rd, and that would be the adoption of the 2020 budget and CIP and approve the property tax levy and the fee schedule. Those meetings all begin at 5:30 at Burnsville City Hall here. They can be watched live on our website, and the address is there on this slide. You can also find more information about the budget and the budget document on our website and that site. When we start out looking at our budget, we really take into account the council's mega end statement, how are we going to deliver services to meet community needs, that we're looking at being a well-balanced city with amenities and using partnerships and a wide range of opportunities to live, work, learn, and play for a reasonable investment. So that is the basis of what we do. When we began the budget process last June, these were the considerations that were our guide to developing the budget. We always start with sound financial policies. Council has your financial management plan that provides the constraints for setting the budget. One of the big focuses we have is to maintain a fund balance of at least 35% of next year's expenditures, so that we have enough cash flow and then a contingency above that. And we look at council priorities when we are looking at how we set up the budget. Of course, staff are careful to make recommendations that build on a foundation for a sustainable future. We have our 5-year financial plans for every fund that the city has, and in your budget document you have that gives you 2 years worth of history, the current year of where we're looking at being it for 2019, and a projection for 2020, as well as 4 years into the future with some high-level projections of where these decisions that are made for 2020 will lead future budgets. We also look at how to deliver current services most cost effectively and seeing the highest quality services for the lowest cost. Much of the increases are attributed this year to increases in costs of doing businesses, such as annual maintenance contracts and increases in wages, health insurance, workers' compensation, PERA contributions, all of those things that affect us as a service organization. Staff in all areas looked at current service levels and reviewed operations to find ways to deliver the services that are expected. Each year brings new challenges and new opportunities to meet those challenges and changing needs, with keeping an eye on the future and new priorities. Back in September, Council met and set a preliminary tax levy that we refer to as the max tax. That's the maximum levy that increase that you can approve at this point, which is a 6% increase, and that's the total city levy and EDA levy combined. We look at those levies combined because you have control over both of those levies, so we like to be as transparent as possible and look at those things as combined levies. Also, it was discussed a plan to increase the utility franchise fees to provide long-term sustainable funding for maintaining and replacing the city's facilities. This allows for less debt and more pay-go funding for a lower total cost of maintaining the facilities in the long run. The alternative to this is to raise property taxes in the future for debt levies and capital replacements, and/or to reduce the council's priorities for replacement of those facilities plans. That would be the alternative of the franchise fee increase. And then that would likely require additional debt and the extension on the term of debt as we go forward, if that were the case. This is new this year. We did a one-pager, front and back, that we included in the most recent Burnsville Bulletin. It's also included in your budget workbook and included on our website. It just gives you a high overview of what the key points of the budget are. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at that particular piece. So what does this budget accomplish? We feel like we've met the goals that we set out in June with this proposed budget. We looked at economic development priorities and funded those. The EDA levy has been reduced, which provides future capacity for funding the council's priorities and objectives in this area. Some of the expenditures were moved to the general fund, so you'll see a corresponding increase in the general fund for that, but it does free up the EDA levy. Debt service has been consolidated and simplified, and we continue to take advantage of refunding opportunities and the use of debt wisely. So we're trying to minimize debt but use it where it is appropriate. Franchise fees are proposed to moderate property taxes in the current year and in future years, and the increase this year is proposed as a one-time increase without future proposed increases in the foreseeable future of this plan to the franchise fees. Infrastructure and enterprise funds are managed in a fiscally responsible manner designed to maintain the city's assets responsibly. And at the heart of it all is maintaining a high service quality. So how do we perform all of those governmental services that the citizens expect from us in areas such as public safety and community development and engineering, road, street maintenance, park maintenance, all of those different areas. How does the 6% levy impact individual property owners? There are many things in the formula that impact an individual property tax bill. Of all of those things up there, so we look at residential value changes, the market value homestead exclusion changes as property values change, commercial values change differently than residential, there's new construction, the TIF district decertifies, and fiscal disparities changes. Of all of the things that are on this chart, you as a city council have control over just the city levy increase. So that levy increase is 6%. How it affects individual property taxes are based on a lot of different things, and it will vary by property. In Burnsville, in 2020, the median valued home, so that's the home that's right in the middle. Half the homes are lower valued and half the homes are higher valued. Has risen about 5%. That's very close to the average increase as well, which was about 6.9% in valuation across all residential properties. So in 2020, the median home is $267,500. For commercial and industrial, that saw closer to an 8% increase overall. So in 2020, total commercial and industrial was $1.7 billion of value in the city of Burnsville. Since we last met, we have received some updated valuations. When you saw this chart or a similar chart the average, the median valued home increase was more like a 3.7%. Because the valuations changed and we have some fiscal disparities numbers that came in, it is now 2.5% with that 6% increase. So we had some valuation changes, we had fiscal disparities, exact numbers, which I had some conservative estimates as part of that as I was calculating the tax rate. So that's good news from the last time you saw this. That's the middle column. To the left is an example of a $200,000 home, a home that was valued at $200,000 last year. If that home increased by 5%, it's more like 2.7%. And for a $400,000, about 2.1%. Now, every home will be different because every valuation changes at a different rate. They do not apply a set percentage increase across the board. It is based on all kinds of sales data, and the county goes in and reviews properties in every certain number of years. So it changes neighborhood by neighborhood and house by house. But as an average, this is what we're looking at. So the monthly increase of a 6% levy is about $2.25 a month at this level. This is just a little excerpt out of that one-page document I showed you a few slides ago on where do the dollars go for services, just to give you kind of a flavor for how much the median valued home is paying for these various services. And that's on a per month basis. And so for that, for the property taxes that are collected in Burnsville, that funds police protection, funds fire protection and ambulance services. Now, ambulance services, there's also fees associated with that, but there's a property tax portion of that. Maintaining roads and parks and vehicles, park amenities, enhancing park amenities, so your parks capital fund, natural resources, recreation opportunities, promoting strong neighborhoods and maintaining property values through your economic development initiatives, and then replacing and improving roads, and then just efficient and effective services as we look at organizational services. This slide gives you a lot of detail, but for one slide, but it shows you where the property taxes are increasing and what that level of property tax would be. That 6% represents a total of $2.1 million of increase. The city levy is increasing and the EDA levy is decreasing. And as I mentioned earlier, we're moving expenses from the EDA fund to the city, and I think in the end it's a little more efficient for way of doing business, and so we're doing that this year. So getting into some of the specific fund details, we are looking at the facility. We have a facilities fund, and back in 2014, I believe it was, we did a facility study, identified that there were a lot of long-term needs, a lot of deferred maintenance and also replacement needs that were facing the city. And we implemented at that time to fund phase one a utility franchise fee. And that was used to remodel the police facility, add on the garage, and then we were looking to the future for expanding replacing Fire Station 1 and working on Fire Station 2 in the future and some improvements to City Hall in the future. It was a long-term plan. Why did we go with franchise fees at the time? It was to diversify the revenue stream for this, and so that all properties in Burnsville would contribute to this basic maintenance of the city's facilities. Even tax exempt properties will pay a franchise fee on their utility bill, so that expands the base. All revenue collected on franchise fees stays in the community. So that is another nice thing. It doesn't affect the fiscal disparities calculation. So it is, if it's collected in Burnsville, it stays here in Burnsville.
Kelly, how many tax exempt properties do we have in Burnsville? Do you know offhand?
I don't have that. We can get that
Send that to
information
us.
for you.
That'd be nice, thanks.
Yes. Or did I may have had that in the background, but we can get that
Thank you.
information for you. And what we're proposing for this budget process is to increase the franchise fee to provide for the long-term stability, fund that fire station one replacement, and the future changes to City Hall and Fire Station 2. We did look at what other cities of our comparable size and then the metro area are charging for franchise fees, and we used our revenue and fee management guidelines as we're looking at that and where Burnsville falls in there. So that was also considered. As we look at this year's budget, we look at where projected property tax increases for current service levels would be. These are very conservative estimates as we look at what are the projected increases in costs and what are the projected increases in other revenues and fees and that sort of thing. And we like to be conservative as we're looking at projecting, say, permit fee revenue or EMS revenue as some of our bigger ones. We don't project those to be aggressive because that would distort this. And we hope to come in better in the future, but we are looking at future increases of 5% to 4.5% over the next 4 years. If we,
Keely, you have a question?
Yes. How much of the current cranes in the air projects can you include in your forecast?
So in these forecasts, these are straight levy dollars as opposed to the tax base that it would be spread over. So I think you're getting at how would that affect those individual properties back when we were talking about like the median home value is going to see more like a 2.5% this year. That is a difficult one to project. But since there are properties that are going up and buildings that are going up, there is guaranteed that there is going to be an increase in the tax base that is all spread to. So you can expect that it would be something less than this.
So those numbers, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4.5, 4.5, actually don't include any of the anticipated valuations to come online when
Right.
those projects get booked to the, gotcha.
Yep,
So this is a true worst-case scenario, for the most part.
Yes, we could always have an economic downturn or other unexpected things, unfunded mandates, increases in costs and inflations and those kinds of things. We do the best we can, but you've completed the compensation study, so we know those things are rolled in here, and that's a phased increase. That's already in there. We're building labor contracts off of that. We estimate that there are going to be some inflationary expenses and current expenses, and we're not projecting that our permit revenue is maintaining. I have a slide in one of the future slides that talks about permit revenue, where it's been and where it's going. We try to keep that more at a level or conservative. And if those things come in higher, then those help offset this in the future as well. But we don't want to over project, and because we it's so volatile based on the economy, so we want to be
So
conservative.
That's the projected levy, but the tax expansion would mitigate the expense to the homeowner or the property owner
Yes.
after we do the levy itself.
You're correct.
Right.
If we do not have an increase in the franchise fees, that means that we would have to issue debt to fund Fire Station 1. We are issuing debt, but the plan is to fund that through franchise fees. If the franchise fees don't increase, then that would mean that we would have to fund that through a debt service levy. And so that would mean a big jump in 2021 to fund the debt service. And then there would be some increased maintenance kinds of things that we're planning on to come out of franchise fees. So that's why you see the purple bars. I should have explained. The green bars are the chart you just saw. The purple bars are if we don't increase franchise fees. These are the kinds of increases you would be looking at in the following years. And then 2024, again, is another big jump because that's when the next phase 3, where we're looking at improvements for City Hall and Fire Station 2, that big jump. So again, more debt service. And the debt service that we have planned is at a more minimal level with franchise fees because we can go more pay-go. We'll still have some debt service, but we're able to go more pay-go, so you have less interest costs. If you are doing it through property taxes, we would end up having to do longer debt probably, and also more debt. And so then you have interest costs that increase that funding, so. And, these projections, there are a lot of options that would happen as we look at that structure in the future. But these are, it's one projection. Questions on that?
Councilmember Schultz?
So in the green where it says with franchise fee increase, what, if you were to add what the difference is on that franchise fee, what would that be? So you have 5% projected property tax increase for current service levels, say in 2021. What is the franchise fee on top of that?
As a percentage of their property
As a
tax bill.
percentage? Because if it's 10%, then what does it matter? If it's not 10%, it matters. So it's difficult to make a decision without having that piece of the information.
So it is, I'm sorry, calculating there in my head. It would generate $3 million in 2020, and then there would not be an increase from there on. That is so every 1% in property tax generates about $340,000
40 or 50?
$40,000. So what the franchise fee does for you is mitigate the ups and downs. So you are really just looking here at 5 years out. So as you can see, the green bars are more level. There would be a one-time increase in 2020, and then more level. With the debt service, you're going to have more ups and downs.
So what it would be, perhaps, if I'm hearing this correctly, is if you added it on top in 2021, it would be slightly under the 10%. When you look at 2022, though, it would be probably higher than the 6.5% because it's leveling it out rather than having it go up and down. Is that correct?
So when you raise the property tax levy, it's gonna stay at that level, and because this chart is looking at just increases on it, so it grows. I'm not sure I'm answering could you state your question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. So for, and I realize that the franchise fee isn't gonna go an additional up each year, but every year it is up over, it would be up over present. Okay, so you have that amount that would be higher than what we have now. So if you added that on top, that amount that's higher, on top of the projected property tax increase, what would that look like? And if I'm hearing you correctly, without raising the franchise fee, you have property tax, projected property tax increases that go up and down. With it, it levels it out more. And if it levels it out more, then that would mean, for example, in 2021, it would be the 5% projected property tax increase, and then an extra amount with that franchise fee that would be a little below the 10%. And then in 2022, it would be the 5%, but with the franchise fee, that would bring it above the 6.5%, if I'm hearing you correctly on that leveling out. Or is that incorrect?
So if we were to put the franchise fee increase in, it would go in the year 2020, and you would see the big jump in 2020. And then there's no increase, so since these are just the increases, as opposed to, I think what you're thinking of is the dollar amount. How would the dollar amount as a chart look? Then it would, I think that's different. But it would only show up as an increase in 2020 because there would be no increase on that portion. If you were adding the two together, you would actually see the green bars come down if you did them together, because there's no increase if you're spreading the increase over the total.
No, that's not what I'm asking. There will be an increase, there just won't be an additional increase every year. But there will be an increase, period. And that increase will not, for example, go away in 2021. So it will be there again, and it will be there again in 2022. We will not remove the franchise fee if we vote in an additional franchise fee. So even though it's not a percentage increase, what I'm asking is, because how this is positing is, this is why we're doing the franchise free, because it brings down the projected property tax increases. But if the additional amount, which is every year it's an additional amount, it's not an additional amount, but it's an additional amount. If that amount is basically the same as property tax increases, then what's the difference? Like, then what would be the difference if you would just do property tax increases where it goes up and down a little bit, or you do that versus the franchise fee with the with the franchise fee increase? So that's the information I'm looking for. Is there a monetary benefit other than making things more equal? Is there a monetary benefit to our residents for this franchise fee with additional property tax increases?
So the monetary benefit is that it spreads it to more taxpayers. So there are more taxpayers paying, so each individual is paying a little bit less. And then we are able to use more pay-go funding, so we're not using debt, so we're not paying for interest on that. And Melanie,
It also stays in Burnsville, so
Right.
that's one other.
Yep.
Because our
component.
property tax increases, they get confiscated. Like our property taxes, a portion of them just get taken away and they're like, thank you very much, Burnsville residents. We will just take this money and give it to some other city. Correct?
On the commercial side, yes, we have to contribute 40% of our, into the pool, and then there's a calculation, and then some of it comes back. And Burnsville is on the, we're a contributor to that, so some of our property taxes on the commercial properties are going into the pool and going elsewhere. So on a franchise fee, in order for us to raise more property taxes, to raise the same amount of property tax, we'd have to raise more property taxes in order to replace the franchise fees. So those are the monetary benefits, and those are a little hard to quantify. And there also is a much longer view to this as well. It's not just these 5 years when we're looking at it. So some of them, as we're looking, as I mentioned, the purple bars are assuming that we would extend the debt longer. So citizens would be paying longer on this than under the green method. I think that you're asking me to compare the total dollars collected between the two. I think that might show the picture that you're asking.
Yeah, and also what that looks like for your average resident for what's coming out of their pocket. Like, how does that affect how much money comes out of their pocket? You know, is there a benefit to doing that? And if I may ask a follow-up question, with franchise fees, what can you use them for and what can you not use collected franchise fees for?
So that is, it's based on your policy. That in Burnsville, we're using them for facilities. And we have proposed in this budget document to expand it slightly to some park facilities and the park trails that are associated with that, maintenance of the park, of some of the park trails associated with that. It matches up to the expansion of the property tax base as to who's paying and the kinds of things that those property owners would value. So there will be some overlap, like with the hospital and with the school district and some other and nonprofits and churches, trails that are. We have a lot of trails and they start needing a lot of replacement and bituminous.
No. No, you don't. Councilmember Keeley's had his hand up forever. We'll come back to you.
All right, go for it.
I'm patient. Go ahead, no, finish it. You should get your complete line in, so you know.
So why would a city not eliminate property taxes and just go with franchise fees?
Because everybody pays.
It is also a different method. That would be that would be a flat, so the franchise fees are a flat rate, as opposed to the property taxes. So you would be talking about setting, do you have a?
Well, I don't know that, I don't know that I have I'd have to check to see if it's statutorily allowed.
We'd still owe into those pots of money that,
Oh, yes.
I mean, so.
With the fiscal disparities, correct. I mean, it somewhat comes down to council philosophy, right? So some cities do a lot of fees. Some cities do a lot of, rely more on the property tax. You know, so it really depends on the makeup of the city and the council's philosophy and how to collect those revenues. I don't know that I've ever thought about, or ever asked the question about collecting everything through franchise fees. So
I would be interested in examining that further with more data, if anyone else is interested in examining that further.
I can't imagine how high those franchise fees would go to cover your property taxes.
Well, we can imagine it, but we don't know it,
Yeah.
which is why we would need more information.
Cup of coffee.
You think so?
Yeah, it's a cup of coffee,
Oh, okay.
right?
Well, I'm sorry.
Councilmember Keeley.
As a longtime advocate of franchise fees, not originally to take out our special assessments, because I would like to be one of those cities that doesn't special assess properties when we come through and do the public road. But I think that'd be a worthwhile discussion. I'd be very interested in learning more about that. I think even if it's considering what we use it for, broadening that to further reduce the dependency on the levy, I would be very interested in that. Going 100%, I'd certainly like to know the answer to that question, as Councilmember Schultz put forth. That would be a very interesting exercise. It might be a bit of a stretch, but who knows? We might learn something we don't know, right?
I think we should keep more of our money.
Absolutely. And I'd like everybody to pay, because everybody benefits from it. Question, you mentioned a number, you said 3 million. Is that the dollar amount that's in that 10% purple pile? In your answer to Councilmember Schultz a couple questions ago, you had mentioned there's a $3 million, need for that debt service or whatever.
So franchise fees currently generate $1.2 million, and we are talking about changing them from $1 to $4. That would generate an additional 3.6 million, for a total of 4.8 million.
Gotcha. So the increase is 3.6 million, right?
Right.
Okay,
So if you were to, a simplistic answer to your question.
Is 10.5% levy increase to raise 3.6 million at 340,000 per 1 point, right? So it takes 10.5 or 10.6% of a levy increase just to do what the franchise fee is doing, on top of the 6% this year or the 5% next year, whichever way you want to put it in, levy that is paying for everything else.
Yes.
So we'd be looking at a 15.5% levy increase if we said, let's just throw the whole burden that we were going to go after in the franchise fee, let's just throw it on the levy and not do the franchise fee. That increase of 3.6 million would send us up to about 15.6 levy increase to achieve the same dollar goal. The reason that it's not quite that big is because you get to that benefit to the question earlier, when 100% of the people are putting into the franchise fee, it becomes a little less burdensome on the, I don't know, what's the rough percentage of properties? I don't know if you do it in numbers or in dollars that are off the tax rolls, that don't pay property tax. Is it 15% of our property owners or 20% of our land or whatever it is?
I think that we estimated that it generated an additional $100,000 in franchise fees and from those properties, and at the higher rate would be $400,000.
Gotcha. So
So-
100 to 400,000 in terms of property tax. I don't know how you really measure that in like number of units of property or acreage or valuation. Like what's the dollar value that's off the property tax rolls divided into the total property valuation of Burnsville? So, I know St. Paul and Minneapolis have really high numbers. They have a high percentage of property that does not pay property tax. I don't think ours is that high, but I've never known the answer to that question. What is our percentage of property value that is actually only going to be paying franchise fee right now? Right. And what's that, quote, lost property tax revenue, right? If it was taxed, what would it be? That's really what we're trying to cover in the franchise, is to recapture the lost property taxes on properties that don't pay, including the city and the school district and all nonprofits, in the form of a franchise fee, which is a little, in my book, even more user-based, because everyone uses the roads, everyone uses the drinking water, everyone uses the parks, right? The sidewalks, and so I tend to think that everyone should be paying for it.
And we are really only capturing the part that is for the facilities.
Yes.
So it's not for the services of
Like street,
police and
right, water,
fire
right.
and park maintenance and street maintenance and all of those things.
Yes, and that was our own self-limitation, because we wanted to control. We didn't want to say, oh, we're just going to use franchise fees, we'll just throw it in the general fund and use it for whatever we want. We and I think rightfully so, put limitations on what we were going to do with it. We said facilities, and that takes a lot of burden off of trying to, CapEx all these things like a new firehouse, right, which is very expensive. And so, and I think, I agree with you the expansion of other facilities. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the understanding with that decision was parks dedication and, has its fund, and that's what was funding the quote parks. But we don't really have a steady growing stream of park dedication or park-related fees to maintain all of those park assets. It was basically deficient in funding, and we were struggling, and we were constantly having to move funding in that area to be able to fund replacing the buildings and keeping the fences and whatever, all of those assets in the parks. So expanding our franchise fee to include facilities that happen to be in parks was the right thing to do. And in retrospect, we probably should have just done it that way in the first time, right? Just that any facility in the city, doesn't matter if it's in a park or not, could fall under this, the benefit of this fund, right?
And it doesn't require you to fund it from the franchise fee, but it does give the opportunity, the option to.
Right, yeah, that it's
we've
in the potential, right,
put
if
this
necessary.
budget package together every year, it gives you the flexibility to do that. So within the Parks Capital Fund, just to recap, there is a tax levy within the within the Parks Capital Fund, and that's for maintenance. And the park dedication can only be used on new things. So as we've used park dedication over the years, and as we have more park dedication right now for a period of time here, we're adding new things. And those new things have to be replaced in the future. And we've added a lot of trails, and trails require a lot of maintenance because it's bituminous, just like roads. And so they need resurfacing and all of those things. So that has greatly expanded the part that needs to be funded from property tax levy. So when we were discussing back in September the thought of using these franchise fees, you gave us direction to say, how can you moderate property tax increases? And that's where we said, well, we can expand the use of to all facilities, and then we added the parks trail piece of it, because it seems to be sort of related in that it's a facility, it's connecting facilities, and it's a need and a use that is used across all the property owners that are in Burnsville. So it was moderating those things. And I think just backing up a little bit too, there are some other things that we've moderated. That was a whole package. When we did the franchise fee, it was a package deal. We had a lot of moving parts, if you remember. We moved, because we did the franchise fees, built that into this projection. We could move the remainder years of the host fees from the landfill out to the Ames Center and pay back the general fund for that $1.2 million loan. So there's host fees that are going to pay back the general fund balance, which frees up the general fund balance to be used on one-time expenditures and freeing up property tax levies. We also simplified the debt structure, and the EDA, we freed up the EDA fund of their $400,000 towards that Ames Center debt, and replace that with general fund. And that gives, we actually then in total have reduced the property tax portion of that funding. So while this is, it sort of seems like it's an apples to apples, it's kind of it's a little bit of apples to oranges in there. Also, as you pointed out, the 3 million would equate to another 10 million on top of the 6% for 2020.
10% on top of the,
Right,
yes.
but
Yep.
we're only seeing 5% difference there. Well, that's because I've made assumptions that if we were to go the route of debt service, we would extend debt service, so we wouldn't have as much debt service, and that we're funding those facilities maintenance needs with property tax levy, so the higher amounts in different years. And you would see that in the out years as well.
Councilmember Keeler's going to have a follow-up question, then I'm going to have a question when he's done.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay.
just so I understand the franchise fee, because I wasn't really on board in the beginning, but I kind of got on board when I kind of looked at it. Our franchise fees are kind of a number, $4 a month, whatever I'm paying. That's not going to change over the years. But as we expand our tax base, if we go to more housing in the city, we have more users in the city, the revenue will actually increase without my fee ever going up.
Yes.
So we're actually bringing more revenue to the city without raising any property taxes at all through that period of time, correct?
Yeah, correct. I'm
And
glad you
that,
pointed
and that money
that
can be
out.
used for, right now, we're using facilities, but we may get to a point where with some of the density in housing is that we're all looking at through 2040, that some of that money can be used for other things besides facilities, which would actually help us keep property taxes down through that franchise fee. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're correct in that.
Thank you.
Another thing that's sort of related to that, that I forgot to mention earlier as a monetary benefit to everyone, is that the franchise fee starts when people turn on the meter. And with property taxes, the tax base doesn't come until the year in which the property, probably the year after the property is finished. So as the building is being built and starts to become occupied, their property, it takes a while for their valuation to hit the property tax rolls just because of the timing. It's an annual thing.
So if we can keep
as of
ourselves on track,
January
we can raise
1st.
our revenue every year in this city. If we keep on track to what the track we're on today,
Yes,
okay?
with all these new units
Yeah.
being built and buildings and meters put in. Then, just
Councilmember
real quick,
Healy.
here's the reason I really, here's an example of why I like the park facilities being included in this. We took a tour, the mayor and I can't remember who else came along, and we saw, we went to a ball field, and one of the dugouts had rotted boards all along the bottom, and it was like way past time to replace. And you think about our park fund, and it's been the victim of the cuts through those lean years. And so we extended the life of these things to the point where it was kind of embarrassing. It would be really foolish to stand there and say, well, that needs to be replaced, but we can't use those fees from our capital, or our franchise fees for our capital fund, for this building because it's sitting in a park. But that building that's not sitting in a park, we can use it for that. So that building will get well taken care of. This was just gonna have to wait until we find the money. Didn't make any sense. So that's why I really like the facilities being all facilities.
Any other questions? Let's move on.
Okay. So fund balance policies, you've seen this in a previous presentation as well, but just again, bringing it that we're when we set the budget, we are looking at that fund balance and making sure we're in the target area for what we need and fiscally responsible, and then use of fund balance for one-time expenditures as necessary. So we don't want to sit on more fund balance than we need. We certainly want to have enough that is fiscally responsible, but as becomes available, we're going to look at one-time expenditures to reduce property tax levy. This is just a visual of where we are and where the fund balance is above the targeted range. So we have had some growth in fund balance, particularly in 2018 and 2019, and we're projecting growth by the end of 2019. In 2018, our results came in $1 million ahead of budget. So it added, if you look at the CAFR, it says we increased fund balance by $270,000, but you had actually in your budget planned to spend $700 and some $1,000. So we're ahead of plan for 2018, which grew the fund balance. And that was because we had revenues that came in ahead, particularly in permits and EMS. And then across the board, there were savings in expenditures by all departments. And that's not unusual. The savings in all departments is not unusual. We usually come in between 1% and 2% under budget, because departments take it seriously to stay within their budget. Sometimes there are things that are out of the control, but that's where it is. For 2019 projection, we're projected to be $1 million ahead, and that is looking at permits and fire department revenues, particularly permit revenues. And those permit revenues really are designed to pay for the inspections and community development area and all the support, organizational support that are in that area as well. And then we had planned some additional use of fund balance for the compensation study first year implementation. If you remember, at the very beginning of this year, 2019, when we came to you and said, this is what the compensation results were, and how are we going to phase this in over a number of years, there was, that was a part to do 2019, the budget had already been set, so you were spending fund balance there. So those are the major areas where 2019 has changed. Additionally, just what we were talking about, because the redirection of the host fees, the payback of the Ames Center loan over the next 2 years is going to provide general fund balance.
Councilmember Workman.
Can you go back one slide? Can you clarify the Ames Center loan for me? Because I've heard in one meeting that this is going to extend out to 24 or so, and now I'm seeing this is being paid back in 21.
There was, in the budget, we were projecting that we were going to be able to start paying that back. That was the longer 2024, before we dedicated the host fees back to the Ames Center Fund. So in dedicating the host fees back out of the facilities fund and into the Ames Center Fund, it goes back to the general fund quicker than it had. So this loan, just as a point of clarification, happened when the facility began in the early couple of years. Projections didn't come in where they were. It was the very beginning of the recession, and host fees from the landfill didn't come in as they were expected to come in those years. So the general fund provided for cash flow that the Ames Center needed. Now, it's been pretty static for quite a number of years now, but and slowly paying back, but it would take a much longer period of time to pay back.
So that's not inferring that the construction loan is being paid off by 21.
It's not the construction, no, not the construction loan.
It's a secondary loan.
The debt, if you were referring to the debt service, that's in the
That's
debt
extended
service.
out.
Right,
This
That
is
was 20
specific
years.
to a separate loan that was issued
for operations.
during recession.
Yeah, we,
It was to shore up the operational
To continue.
deficit.
Keep the lights on.
instead of a straight transfer, we required it to be a loan to be paid back.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a point of clarification. Thank you.
So planned uses of fund balance in this budget are most of them are very consistent with what we've done in the past. The sustainability and recycling program comes out of the landfill abatement reserves that came a while ago and are reserved by state statute to be spent on that sort of thing. So that draws down that fund balance. The council has a 10-year plan to contribute some fund balance to the ICE Center debt of $140,000 a year. That comes out of a reserved fund balance as well. And then we have consistently used fund balance to fund elections. That's an every other year expense. So instead of increasing the levy one year and reducing it the next year and up and down, we have done fund balance for elections. And so we continued to do that for 2020. And of course, with a big presidential year, that is kind of it's a $220,000 estimate at this point in time for elections. Because, as you saw, we generated a good number ahead of budget on permits because we've had a lot of activity over the past 2 years coming in ahead of budget. The community development software that was planned to be spent out of the IT capital fund, and then therefore would be IT capital levy. We are proposing that that is funded through the fund balance that was generated from permits. So that reduces the amount that is needed in the IT capital fund over the next 5 years. We are expecting that community development software would probably be a hosted solution. At one time, we thought it would be a purchase of a big system, but we're projecting more there'll be an annual cost. So we are planning to do that for 5 years. And then capital equipment transfer, there, as you saw in your background, we're proposing 2 inspectors, 1 in fire and 1 in permits, and they will need vehicles, and so use of that permit and EMS revenue that increase the fund balance to fund the capital needed for that. And then there were some fire and police equipment replacements that were moved from the general fund to the capital fund. So that is just a matter of moving those. So there's a few big types of equipment that occur on not annual basis that are better handled in the capital fund to moderate those increases and in property tax levy, so we move those to the capital fund. And then it has been the council's policy to address entrance monuments on a every other year, or I think we've skipped a year. Did we skip?
We've just got 2 total.
We have 2. So we are proposing that there is fund balance available to do another entrance monument for $75,000, and that would be a use of fund balance. And they have, in the past, we had 50,000, you might have noticed, but the costs of those have increased, and so we're allowing 75,000.
To make sure that we have. Could I ask a question about the implementation of those? Where are we at in the cycle of getting them all done? I know there was gonna be so many of them, we're gonna do 1 a year. Are we halfway through? Do we have 1 or 2 left, or is there a lot left?
So if you think we have 7 major highway entrances, the 242s, the 213s, and 3 on 35. The only ones we have completed are the 2 on 13. So I was driving 494, went in Eden Prairie and saw they got one right in the right of way, which used to be outlawed.
Right, I
And-
saw that too.
Yeah.
I've seen that in Savage. How are they getting it done? Oh, Scott
So
County.
then we contacted MinDOT and said there's some change, and they indicated that for sure for the northbound 35 and southbound 35E, there would be a spot for them. Southbound 35W is a little more tenuous, so that's what we'd prioritize. We'd do the 235s, then we'll evaluate to see if we can get southbound 35W, and then the 242s would be our last.
I kind of bring this up because I'd like to explore options of accelerating getting those done. You know, the reason we made it a decision to do it once a year, 50,000 a year over 7 or 8 years, was we started this decision back when things were quite a bit different. Now with all these moving parts and all this revenue and the savings coming through, can we get these done quicker? Because with all the building we're doing right now and all these apartments and all this other stuff going on, it'd be nice if they were all done and in, from my perspective. Now, I know we can't do them all in 1 year, but can we look at discussions of how we can take some of this money that we've saved in all these other places and say, can we just finish this project? So all of our entrances have these highly desired monument signs, and so we're done with this installation.
I can say is they are every year for 5 years. 1 year for 5 years is what's in the current budget
That's it,
plan.
right, yeah.
So it's definitely better than every other year, but still
Yeah.
take 5 years to do it.
Do it faster.
Yeah, I just think at 75,000 and with $1 million in
budget.
savings and $1 million in additional revenue coming in through these revenue streams, the reason I put more value on it is it's a huge, visible perception benefit for 50 to 75,000. And with all of our growth, the building going on, I'm now questioning why we're staying with that original track that was designed many years ago when things were quite different. And is there any way to accelerate it?
You could argue we get better pricing if you,
Well, yeah,
Did them all
it's gone up
once,
to,
but-
from 50 to
but
75 because we're
then-
dragging it out, right?
where do you come up with the,
Yeah, and we were dragging it out
Six,
because we couldn't
300,000.
afford it. Not that we suddenly can afford it, but it looks like we can with all the savings we're getting in other places. And then, because by the time we get them done, they're gonna be 100,000. And now we've paid, it cost us, what, 2 used to cost to build one. Because in year 4, I mean, you're saying it went from 50 to 75. When we get to year 3, 4, and 5, what's it gonna be? It's not gonna stay at 75, probably.
75 is an estimate as well.
So it's, we've had this discussion when it comes to infrastructure and roads and, it's do it, because every year you wait, it adds substantial costs. We have that discussion at I-35. Let's keep pushing to advocate to get it done now. It's overdue in need, and every time we look at the delay of a year, the dollar amount just keeps escalating exponentially. 5 and 13, classic example. I think it started out at 15 million, and it took $48 million to complete it by the time it finally got through all the approvals and funding lined up and actually got done. It was a $48 million project, not a $15 million project.
10 years to get it done.
Yeah, so my personal ask for the rest of the council is ask staff to look at options to accelerate that and get those monuments and our entrances done as quickly as possible. I think the timing with everything else we got going on in economic development is actually justifies it. That's my perspective.
We'd have to add it into the budget.
No, it's fund balance.
Is it? It's already in the
Yeah,
budget? to
No, I mean,
accelerate?
I'm suggesting we look at fund balance
Going further?
that we've assembled through a lot of savings and see what can be afforded sooner.
Oh, through
In other words.
through savings, should we have it?
Yeah,
That's one of the.
no
things
levy
that-
increase, just fund balance, and it might be just, maybe it's 2 a year instead of 1 year or something like that. But something
How many
faster than
left?
1 a year.
And we couldn't get the one on 35W South done, no matter how hard we tried.
I don't think it'd be waste effort anyways over there.
Yeah, that one's gonna have to wait a little while anyway.
235s, other 235s were,
Yeah.
and then Dakota County and 42 we'd have to see, but.
Kelly?
In answer to your question, we can certainly work through an option with fund balance. Your other option would also be use of EDA fund balance. So there is some fund balance there. That's your choice, then it's not available for other things, but that would be another option.
I don't know how the rest of the council looks at those monument signs, but I think they have a big impact on the perception of how our city looks. I think it's a big pride point for people who live here, and because we're doing all this building, that's what's really fueling my push to do this, is we have all these cranes in the air and all this new building going on and tons of new residents that are gonna be moving in. I think I would just like to see these done sooner than later.
I think it goes with the overall branding of the city, Dan. It's, with all we're doing, the water tower and everything else that we're, to enhance the image of the city as
Agreed.
people come and visit.
Does that mean we need to put the "you belong here" underneath the Burnsville? No?
I don't think we need to, no, I think we would stick with this particular sign.
Put it right on the highway
There with a
itself.
can of spray paint.
Just
Put on a vest and go.
Not a good idea.
You and your friends take care of that, Vince.
Just give me a stencil and we'll go.
Well, just to close out that discussion, what do you, I guess, what do you want to hear City Manager Lee from the council on that as a formal direction?
Acting Mayor Gustafson and council, I think we'd appreciate some direction. I think to Ryan's point, the 35s are easy, the 235s are easier. With
Those
MinDOT's
two
change in process and permissions, 35W is gonna be a challenge, so we'll need to have some time for that, and 42, we'd have to work through that, so I don't wanna commit for Ryan, you'll have to correct me if I'm going astray, but I think we could begin working on it. I think we've already talked about it on a staff level to do that.
Probably a logical plan would be the 235s in 1 year, the 242s the following year, then see what we can get done.
35W when
Yeah, we
that
can
time
work on
comes
There you
up.
go.
That shouldn't be a
That's better.
problem.
It's funny we're talking about this, cause I was just on 35E coming into Burnsville the other day and I saw that sign, and I thought that might be a good spot for our green step sign. That's still in the utility closet, but, I had thought about that, and here we are talking about it less than 3 or 4 days ago, so, I think the 35 ones are more of a priority than the 42. I think that schedule you're on right now probably makes more sense.
We in agreement here, everyone?
Yeah. 235, it's the
Okay.
235Es, right?
You got the
And
four of
then
us going, yeah.
242, so is it, are we talking this year or in 2020? Did we do one in 2019?
No.
No, this was the skip year, so this is 2020. So we would just go to two next year, two in 2021, and then hopefully 35W would be ready in the third year.
And if there's a location, there has to be a certain distance from other signs that you can
Right.
put on. If there is a location, we'd be able to know by then. But I've received confirmation the other two, they would have a reasonably decent spot for them.
Cool. That'd be great. I think that's something we should do.
You come up with good ideas, Dan.
Once in a great while, well, once a year.
Okay. Kelly, we can continue.
So this pie chart just demonstrates for you how the general fund is funded, and as you can see, it's almost 70%, 69% funded through property taxes, and charges for services being the next largest at 15%. So this chart demonstrates what we were just talking about with permits and licenses and how much has been generated. Like I said, we don't want to be overly optimistic when we estimate permit revenue coming in because of the fluctuations, and if we do estimate them high and then it goes the other direction, that means cuts and a problem for the following year. So we would rather look at how are we going to spend it after it comes in versus spending it before we have it. And as we are looking at the future years, we have them very flat in those projections. So, and we'll continue, each year we update, we'll continue to update. EMS revenues are a little different. They have consistently, their increase, their runs are increasing every year. So those revenues, we have built in a small increase, but we again are conservative, so the blue being budget and the green being how the actuals have come in. We budget for an increase, but we are a little below actuals every year. And there's a lot of, there's some fluctuation in this too with healthcare laws and regulations and how much Medicare and Medicaid pays and all of those things that we don't have a lot of control over that could change. So that's where we keep that conservative estimate. Just backing up there too, that there are service implications, service delivery implications that go along with the number of runs increasing as well that these revenues generate. Fees and charges, you have a whole section in your book dedicated to fees and charges that include all of the various fees. And it shows you what the fee was for 2019 and what the proposed fee is for 2020. The liquor license is proposed to increase. I point that one out only because it requires a public hearing. So as part of your budget adoption, there will be a public hearing associated with that one particular increase. As we look at the expenditure side for the general fund, we're a service organization, and so as you look at that big piece of the pie is people. I apologize, those fonts are very small there, but people is the big blue section of that chart. And so all of the things associated with staffing, which includes cost of living adjustments, and you had your compensation study implementation that are implementing step increases over the next few years to catch people up to the market and to your pay philosophy, which is to pay in the middle of the market competitively. That is going to really help also with retention of employees and being able to hire good and great employees. So, currently, we have 283 FTEs. Those are full-time equivalents. Those are your full-time staff, not, we don't calculate an FTE for seasonal staffing. The budget includes year 2 of the phase compensation study. We have a higher than usual health insurance increase funded in this year, as well as we had a challenge with health insurance. And it's year 2 of public safety pension increases. Our workers' comp rates are increasing, and that is consistent with other cities too. Workers' comp rates are just increasing.
Why?
I'm sorry.
It's experience. It's our claims experience and claims experience across cities.
We're in a, pardon me, Madam Mr. Chair.
Councilmember.
Mr. Acting Mayor, sorry. Is
Ambassador
that,
Gustafson.
are we in a statewide pool, or are we looked at just as a city? Or are we in the state unemployment pool kind of thing?
So we are covered under League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust, and I think all but maybe the bigger 2 cities are included in that. I think, I mean, it's virtually everybody.
Pretty much everybody.
So our experience could be exceptionally good, but we're part of a pool that if the pool has a lot of heavy claims, we're going to be impacted by the premium.
And we've had some experience. We had a lot of good years, and we've had some experience issues as well, so.
Our experience does weigh into our rates. So, of course, we do have.
We get the benefit of the pooled rate, but if we have a significant spike in claims, our premium is going to reflect that.
We have both.
Where not everyone else is.
So are cities underwritten individually then on that policy, or is?
Well, I can't give you the insurance guy insurance information, can I?
Okay.
So we're part of an overall pool. Kelly, chime in if I go astray here, but they look at our experience, and then we get our rating based on that. So if we have some catastrophic claims, that will reflect negatively, but it's moderated by our participation in the pool.
And we do have some stop loss kinds of parts to that, and we have deductibles associated with that. So it's not a huge increase. So I don't mean it to call it out that we have this giant increase, but it is a trend upward, and it is one of those things that's taking a bite out of things.
Are there like risk prevention things we can do to mitigate some of that loss? Or are we already?
We are already. We've had a safety committee for quite a number of years that's represented by all departments on that safety committee. We get suggestions from the league on, what areas to address. They help us with that. So we are doing, and have been for quite a number of years.
And I guess the more I think, and I'm sorry for speaking out of turn, the more I think about it, I mean, our police are part of that pool as well, correct? I mean, and so there's only so much risk assessment you can do in law enforcement, or as opposed to, say, forestry, which would be a more controlled environment.
So, Acting Mayor, so typically what you want to do is you have a sense, you get reports based on what kind of injuries you're seeing throughout the organization. They're not attributed to individuals, but then you, as the employer, you take steps to put in programs in place to help address those issues that you're seeing. And some of them are just inherent to the job. Public safety is one of those areas that are inherently risky. Public works is as well. You often see claims in public works. So, but we are doing some department-specific and looking to do some organization-specific development on those areas as well. So building on what we have right now.
It'd be interesting to hear more about that as that produces itself. That's what I landed on, produces itself, as that becomes more tangible. Thank you.
And then we are also investing in organizational and employee development in this budget as well. So increased revenues and service pressures. Some of those same revenues that we were just talking about, the EMS services and the permits and licensing services, means that there's a lot more to do. All those revenues are up because there's a lot more services that are being needed in those areas. We are addressing those with these FTEs proposed. So in fire, a fire inspector to begin to address workload volumes. That also does free up some of the things done by the current administrative staff. So it's helping in that area. And that would be funded with the additional fire department revenue, which is basically EMS fees generated. And then in community development, a building inspector and an inspections assistant, so it's 2 FTEs to address the permit activity and the backlog, and funded by permit revenues that have already been collected and are anticipated. And in Public Works, they are proposing 3 FTEs for Public Works maintenance trainee positions. So these are positions that would be replacing seasonal staff. And maybe Ryan and Jeff, do you want to speak to the efficiencies and thoughts that you have on that?
Well, the whole industry, public works industry, crosses over with construction. And as construction booms, hiring qualified maintenance workers is a very difficult challenge. And we also have challenges finding seasonal workers on the same thing. And the thought is if we can open up to full-time positions, we can kind of train our own maintenance workers for future opportunities within Burnsville and other places as well.
It'd be modeled off the CSO program here at the police that works really well for them. You get like an extended trial with this employee and see if you like them before you move on, as opposed to a 1 interview for an hour and hoping you got the best here. We should be able to really build some bench strength for ourselves. And we're replacing more than one seasonal employee. This was it almost 6 or 7 reduction in seasonals in order to fund this out. So, but we think someone who's wanting to get in the industry is probably worth the equivalent of 2 seasonals kind of situation.
So it's balanced, or, I'm sorry, it's budget neutral, but you're just shifting into.
Not quite. There is some investment, but
Stability.
definitely. And these are the 3 seasonals who were last year, winter, that we had to hire for in the snowplow. So
These are the ones you've already hired then?
So last year we had to, those were 6 months, so those folks are gone.
Okay.
And then we are in the we're in the process of attempting to hire these now.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Councilmember Workman?
Question on, by the way, Ryan, I think that's I really like that concept, and I'm happy that materialized, because I think that's a smart way to handle that. On the community development side, with the 2 FTEs, at some point I thought there was some discussion about cross-training internally. Is that part of this process, or where does that fit into this green box?
Acting
City
Mayor
Manager,
Gustafson and council. At this point, there's been no council direction to change how we do our code enforcement. So while we have pulled some of our code enforcement staff as a kind of a stopgap, it's a temporary measure. Should there be any further changes to our code enforcement philosophy, we would have the ability to do more of that.
Well, is this an opportunity to do that
We have several times.
formally?
Councilmember Keeley?
City Manager Lee, could you give the council some, because I know we've talked about it a few times, but this is one of those things that I was wondering, okay, when are we going to have the come to Jesus discussion on it and make the change, if we were going to make a change? Do we have that on a future meeting schedule or something that is already booked, or do we need to book that?
Councilmember Keely and the council, I believe it, I'm going to have to remember, I have to look it up, is it perhaps on the all-day work session? I believe that was referred to the all-day work session. Because there are two components when you think about code enforcement. It's what are you going to enforce? And then how are you going to enforce it? So, those are two components that, I do understand the council has talked about it. I understand there's some other, thoughts behind how to do that, but at this point, I don't recall any specific council action in changing that direction. I'm gonna look around the table and see if perhaps I misunderstood.
I feel that, council keeps expressing a direction and expressing impatience in that direction. And so I'm just gonna note that at this point, I'm very impatient. And I don't know how many more times council needs to talk about this and express a desire for this to move forward. So my patience is gone on this particular topic. So if it isn't already on the all-day work session, let's make sure that it is. But let's get this moving forward, because each time this comes up, we feel like, okay, we were asking to move in this direction, and we understand that you have to wait for us to take a formal vote or that kind of thing, but dang, I think we've been ready for a while. So I don't know how else to put that more bluntly. And I would ask my other city councilors, are you there yet?
I think based on prior conversations, I wish I had all of those memorized, that maybe we weren't clear on our direction with a firm recommendation, but that this was something that we wanted to discuss and revisit and kind of redefine our philosophy on code enforcement. But now that I'm seeing 2 FTEs as part of the budget process, are we putting the cart before the horse before we get to that conversation? Because if we proceed that way, are we gonna are asked to walk back 2 new employees?
Yeah, I agree.
Councilmember Keely.
Acting Mayor. Well, I would suggest that we have the discussion. I would rather not wait till the all-day work session if this could be done in December, but I think we've already hashed it out. I'd like to move forward with a decision, and I think all we need is an opportunity at a work session, if we can put it on December's, and have the discussion. We need, obviously, some information from staff on who and what they do and that, but I think we've already actually migrated in this direction in a temporary sense. Let's just codify it in a permanent sense. This is what we want those folks to do, period, going forward, before we hire on any more additional staff in that department. Understanding there's a need there, I only have enough information to tell me that the need is temporarily addressed by these retrained and refocused enforcement folks. We need maybe some further facts from the city manager or city staff on exactly what that is. Is it 100% gap filled? And if those people that have been repurposed into that area, are they good candidates to be permanently repurposed there, or are they going to come back and we're going to do some other shifts? But ultimately, I think it's time to make the final decision.
We have a placeholder for an additional budget discussion, should it be needed, and maybe that might be an opportunity for this. Just a thought.
Yeah, was that the
The
end of November?
Yeah, Acting Mayor Gustafson and Council. Yeah, we had that placeholder for November 26th, depending on how tonight's meeting occurred and what other questions you might have. I will note that with the stopgap that we're doing right now with our code enforcement staff, that we're paying overtime. So it's not exclusively moving them from code enforcement over to building inspection. It's additional hours that we're having them work to try to reduce that stopgap you know, the
Right.
1,500 roofing permits and, you know, all the, development that we're seeing in town. That's what we're trying to, tamp down a little bit, or address, I should say.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but our building inspectors have to be specially trained to be building inspectors. They have to go through the classes.
Yep.
And we have 2 inspections that are so trained now, but are they up to date with their licensing?
You
with
know what,
their hours and all that?
You know, Acting Mayor Gustafson, I'd have to verify with Jenny, but yeah, they are able to pick up on some of the inspections that we
Okay.
need.
We got
They have
kind
all
of a
the
double thing going here.
certifications, that I do not know.
Yeah, because right now, we know that our homeowners, which we've gotten emails from, and our developers are behind because while we were doing great things to promote all the building in the city, we didn't do great things to back up the building that came at us, and a lot of it came at us fast, and we are playing catch up, and this is going to be going on a long time. So I understand the need to look at crossover, but we need to take a look at what do we really need for what it's going to look like, and how many inspectors do we really need out there to keep up with all that's going on. I mean, this multi-housing thing, this is not, you just stop in once in a while and see what's going, there's a lot of apartments being built out here, and it takes a lot of time. We have 1 plumbing inspector, and we have 1 electrical inspector in this town.
That's not enough.
That's not very good. So anyways, but I agree with you that we've all agreed that we need to look at how we're doing enforcement, and how many people we need for enforcement, and can we move people over to the inspections area and start working more on the growth of the city? How do we make that happen? Councilmember Workman.
To answer your question, I think the number is 2 right now. Cause that's what's the ask is 2 full-time employees. That might change next year. If Center Village picks up, probably gonna need more than 2. But then I think we need to clearly define what our expectations are for code enforcement, and then justify that, with the how or the why. So if it's feasible to move 2 from here to here without hiring 2 FTEs, you know, I'd like to do that.
Well, I think we should let staff come
Without
back to us at the next
understanding
meeting
the
and tell
legs.
us how they can do that.
And my follow-up question to city managers, is that enough time to do that?
Well, you know, yeah, I think I can work with Jenny to get some information back to the council.
2
Yeah.
weeks?
So we're gonna come back on the 26th then for this.
Yeah, that
Well, that'd be-
sounds like that's what the council's
That's faster than
desire
I
is.
thought you could, so great. I was
I
shooting
will-
for mid-December.
You know, Acting Mayor Gustafson and council, I'll give myself a little bit of wiggle room if I talk to Jenny in the morning and she's, you know, more information comes forward, you know, it might end up being in December. But I understand that this is a priority. I think we had this for the all-day work session, but we certainly can bring it forward yet this fall.
I think for the sake of our budget discussion, it seems to make sense to discuss that now.
Even though it's funded by permit fees collected and anticipated funding
Yes.
FTEs, we could capture that revenue and use the existing staff, or some combination of that. We
I just
need
don't
that
want to put our
expertise.
inspections in jeopardy and keep causing our residents and our businesses to spend thousands and thousands of dollars because we can't get our job done.
Agreed, I'm 100% with you. We have a Band-Aid on it right now.
Exactly.
Band-Aid might not even be big enough to be actually doing the job that
It's
it needs
not.
to do. That's why I kind of think this still has a lot of urgency, and
Yep.
I want to make sure we talk.
So then the question is, what are those overtime employees doing in code enforcement that they maybe potentially wouldn't need to do, where they could commit their 9 to 5 to
Exactly.
this?
So,
And I think that's what we need to explore.
yeah, Acting Mayor Gustafson and council, I think that's the kind of the crux of the question, right? The council's priorities thus far has been defining how and what should be enforced. And we can change and to redefine what is enforced. We can change and define how we enforce it. So it's a process and it's a action. At this point, there's been modifications of our code, but there hasn't been a direction or a thorough conversation from my perspective saying, we will no longer enforce X, Y, or Z. So stop enforcing that, and thus there's an impact on staff, staff time, right? So there's kind of two questions for the council to weigh through, to talk through, and what their preference is, so.
Fortunately, we won't have as much garbage screening. Code enforcement, which was evidently the number one complaint, city complaint, so that should hopefully help their department
That won't
not
clear
have to get
building
in the middle of that,
inspections,
so. No, but what we're talking about is if we have two of our code enforcement who could then move into inspections.
No, I understand that.
And then they no longer have to do code enforcement because we've lessened that amount, that may be something that helps. So that would help. We don't know how much though.
Well, it'd be helpful to hear Jenny's plan if she plans on keeping them doing that plus the other, if that she feels she needs 4 of them, I don't know.
Acting Mayor Gustafson on council, I mean, the plan is for, the additional staff to help relieve the logjam that we have. And understanding that, the building and the construction that we're seeing today, there are tails with all of that.
Yeah.
And building inspectors' talents and skills and expertise will offset that. So the skill set that a code enforcement officer brings is different than a building inspector. It's different
Absolutely.
training, it's different background. So, again, I'll let Jenny help me speak to the talents and the expertise needed. But there certainly would be a transition period were we to have any of our code enforcement staff be then asked to do building inspections, because those do require different levels of expertise.
All right. We'll talk about this in a couple of weeks.
The remaining expenses in the general fund are things like the Dakota Communications Center, which is our dispatch, the insurance, legal and audit, professional services, utilities, fuel, I could read them, but you can read them too. My point in here is that there's not a lot of room for changes in these areas because there's a lot of big expenses that there's not a lot of area, I guess. Moving on to the special revenue funds. So in that type of fund, there's about $2.8 million of expenses, and we're talking, the big ones would be the cable and the EDA, and then we also have forestry and sustainability. So just talking about the EDA fund, and I've already hit on that a little bit. We've moved the staffing to the general fund, eliminated the transfer to the Ames Center, and increased the debt service levy in the general fund. As a comparison, your 2019 budget includes the ELF grant revenues and expenditures in an equal amount. I excluded that from this chart so that it didn't distort the comparison, but you can see 2019 has more revenues and more expenses, and we've dropped down the revenues and the expenses going forward. 2020 has some one-time expenses related to retail analytics, to the there's some professional services related to the landfill agreements that are in process, and then also a placeholder for some activity in Center Village. So those are more of a one-time, as you see the 2020 going forward. And those are actually the things I was just talking about, so I can skip over that one. The other big fund in special revenue funds is the cable franchise fees, and this one's kind of in a transition period of time. Cable franchise fees are very flat or probably declining, which we don't know if but we've projected them flat in this case, and this would indicate that we are spending down fund balance in this area. This fund does contribute $185,000 to the general fund every year from the franchise fees that are collected, so likely we will need to, as we develop the next year's budget for this, we'll probably be looking at declining that, which would leave a spot in the general fund. We are looking at a communications plan in 2020, so looking at what should the communications department be doing, and so this fund really pointing out here, yes, we know the trajectory that it's on, and it will be something that will be more to come in the next few years as we look at that and refine this further. Oops, went two at a time there. Included in the budget document is the capital improvements plan. There's some big things highlighted here and what's coming up. Heather Hills Water Tower rehab, in the Stormwater Fund, the Sustainability Guide Plan is being updated. Lake Marion Regional Trail is a big thing in the Parks Capital Fund. We got Nicollet Commons Water Feature. In the vehicle replacements, we have a fire truck in the next year. Those are always big when we have to replace those. And then, of course, in facilities, Fire Station 1 replacement is starting. Land was just approved to be purchased in 2019, and the construction plans would begin in 2020. Then we have our normal street reconstruction and technology capital. So I'm going to turn it.
Look at that big spike in the middle.
I just have a quick question, Kelly, on, just for my own knowledge and maybe the people watching, on what's the Nicollet Commons water feature?
Okay.
Well, the Nicollet Commons water feature has been leaking water for a significant amount of time. I think it's been brought up to council probably at least 2 years ago. And I think as you look at it, it was designed for, occasional, a parent to have a kid walk through it or something like that. We never anticipated there were gonna be daycares dropping buses of kids off, for the water feature, so, it's heavily loved. How about that? And in need of some investment
Okay.
to keep it sustainable and the way it's currently being used.
I remember when that first opened and they had the limestone rock on the bottom of the river, and it was clogging all the filters, and that got pulled. And I agree, I don't know anybody anticipated this becoming, a modified water park.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that it's probably getting beat up more than planned.
Biggest situation is water loss. We lose almost 50% of the water as opposed to being recycled. I don't know the exact number, but we're losing a lot of
From
water.
splashing it out and,
It's not fully known,
Yeah.
but we're gonna have to replace a lot of the componentry to
Okay.
get to the bottom of that.
very good, thank you.
Oh, Councilmember Kickley.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. Some years ago, we put an investment in, I believe it was water purification, chlorination, because it was being used as a public wading pool instead of just a water feature to occasionally sprinkle your feet in. At that time, was there any underground work being done to put that in, or was that all in the pump house building type of thing?
Most of it was in the pump house.
Okay.
We feel the majority of the loss is probably in the underground piping is where we need to go with this
Like
project.
freeze thaw, cracking possibly, or whatever? Yeah, okay. So it's like a sprinkler system that's got a leak and it's feeding your lawn deep down under.
Big
Although
system.
unfortunately, it's feeding the concrete.
Yes.
The aquifer now.
So Ryan and I are tag teaming a little bit here, but this just gives you a visual of order of magnitude in the different funds that we have or where our capital projects are for 2020. So IT capital is, and their equipment and vehicle funds, those are just dealing with replacement needs in those funds. And I broke out facilities into two portions. The facilities fund, we're just maintaining and replacing everyday kinds of capital needs in lots of facilities. That is the first column, and the second column is the actual construction of Fire Station 1. And of course, that number on Fire Station 1 is to be determined. We're really at the very beginning process of designing the building and figuring out exactly what that number will be. And you'll have lots of input on that as it comes back to you in that process, the normal process of the project. Parks capital is, and we've kind of discussed some of these other things as we've gone to. So parks capital, that's our park improvements and replacements. And then street maintenance, those are sort of those extra things around on street maintenance would be guardrails and
Bike path.
Crack seal
Crack
coat,
sealing, yeah, that's
striping,
pretty big, yeah.
those types of things.
Is that where our bike paths are coming out of as well?
Those would be more on the Parks Capital side of things.
Okay.
And then improvement construction fund, those are your, and the ITF fund, those are your road and street projects go through there. The ITF are the things that are funded with the ITF levy and MSA street aid from the state. And then the improvement construction tend to be those things that we share with Dakota County and other agencies in there. So, equipment and vehicle fund, this fund is challenged. There's increasing costs of vehicle replacements, new technologies and requirements, and past assumptions are changing on the use of vehicles. We are proposing that in 2021 there will be a fleet study, and we will be doing some research in 2020 and 2021, just to make sure that fleet is right-sized. Are we taking advantage of other options and looking at what we should do with those vehicles? And then the new vehicles, as I mentioned earlier, would be funded from a fund balance transfer from the general fund. You can see the green line is our fund balance, and that dips down. The purpose of a capital project fund is that you can't keep those kinds of expenditures completely even year after year. There's some big needs, spikes in needs. You can see on the blue lines, those are our revenue sources. Those are pretty even, but we manage the ups and downs within the fund with fund balance. So the red lines peak because you have large vehicles like this year. In 2020, we have a fire truck. We have some ambulances that are in there and some large street ones. So there's just some needs where some years are higher than others. And the fleet department has a whole schedule of all the vehicles, and we try to manage that as best we can.
Similar to how we will hopefully be quickly resolving inspections and code enforcement, the new vehicles for the inspector positions, we'll also need to add that onto that discussion so that we can have that wrapped up in there as well.
Ryan, do you want to hit on the
I cannot guarantee that a fire truck costs exactly $833,538, but
Wow.
that must be a quote we
very
got from there.
specific.
So, but it's a very expensive vehicle. And when we talked about assumptions changing, so we were looking at the fleet replacement policy, and one of the big situations is it calls for replacement every 18 to 25 years, and they are worn out after 12. And when you replace a fire truck, you got almost zero residual value. That it's almost hard to give them away. So these things really depreciate extremely quickly, and you can see the cost at, and that's one of the big reasons why the fund does have some of its challenges. Streets is one of the big dual axle trucks and a front end loader that's necessary. And the police, that's pretty much an annual situation there. We replace
5 squads.
5 squads each year. That's how fast they go through them.
On the fire truck and the ambulances, also very much driven by the increasing number of runs, so we're putting a lot of miles on those, a lot faster than we had in the past. When you think is particularly the ambulances, they're picking somebody up within Burnsville, but they're typically delivering them to a hospital outside of Burnsville. They may be driving Hennepin County, all kinds of hospitals throughout the metro area. So
Councilmember Keating?
puts a lot of miles on.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Augustus. And a question on the fire truck, it struck me odd that over the years, I've heard Craig and Heather, and just, we haven't had this discussion yet, to talk about when these big assets reach their end of life for us, right, as the size of city we are. I look at, fire trucks like the one that we are apparently going to retire, and think of what is the small community who needs a fire truck but can't afford 500 or 833,000, but would love one for 200,000 used or 150,000 or 100,000 used, right? Do they go out and buy brand new trucks, or where do they get their equipment from if it's not a hand-me-down at a discounted price?
Yes, it happens that way. I've heard several times that our usage of vehicles actually is up there with the Chicagos, the Detroits, and that type of thing. So our used market is very minimal to none. Those cities are buying new trucks. They're also getting used trucks, but probably not a used truck from a full-time fire department that has our high usage. I will literally tell you, if we get 20 grand out of a fire truck after it is 12 years here, we are lucky.
So
We take such great care of them. I just can't believe that, when we look at the condition, and mechanically, right, drivetrain, axles, transmission, those could be factors that might be needing of, a $20,000 overhaul or a $50,000 overhaul. But the rest of the vehicle, we take such great care of them, it blows me away that they have no residual value other than, let's say, 20,000. Right?
I think we know what it takes to keep it on the road past 12 years, and I think they know that we know what it takes to keep it on the road past 12 years.
So they can afford to buy it at 20 grand. The only way they can afford to buy it at 20 grand is because they know there's going to be 50 to 80 grand a year to keep it going, right?
Yeah.
Just because it's at that life. Sorry, I cut you off, Councilmember Workman.
My father-in-law's on the rural fire board in southern Minnesota, and they do get grants. And they work together, so they might have one truck for 4 townships in one city, and they do work together to get grants, probably to offset some of those extreme costs.
Yeah. I want to buy one of these trucks one day. If they're only 20 grand. I just want to be a fire truck owner for
can drive it in the
$20,000 bucks, because
parade.
I thought they were way more expensive than that. Unless the collectors that we deal with the fire muster, some of those are very old, so I can understand those are not that expensive, unless it's some sort of collector value. But these things look like they're at least 100,000 on the backside. I just can't believe that. What will Walzer give us for it? Will they buy used cars, they advertise. They buy used. I'm kidding.
Recreational vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Camper.
Yeah.
It's just a big tank in there. You'd have to carve out the
big
top
tank.
and make a little living space inside the big
Ooh.
water tank.
Sell it to preppers.
To what?
Preppers.
Doomsday.
Oh, yeah, doomsday prepper, yeah. You could live in the tank.
It's a niche market.
We can include it in our study, our vehicle study.
Wow.
Okay, So this is the facilities fund, in looking at, and we talked a lot about this already as well. 2020 is the fire station construction. You just purchased the land in 2019. And then 2024 is the year, that phase 3, which is, Fire Station 2 and City Hall, from the original facilities plan, that was the year that hit. So as you can see on the green line there, with this planned franchise fee of increasing the franchise fee, you're seeing your fund balance go up through the year 2023, and then a sharp decline, and that's because we would be using cash available from that collection to fund part of the improvements in 2024. So this does the timing of 2024 is from the original plan that was done quite a while ago. This provides you some flexibility in splitting those projects up into City Hall and Fire Station 2. Those two do not need to be tied together as far as bidding goes, or the projects would be, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, but they are not as related as, doing Fire Station 1 and,
Councilmember Workman?
Kelly, does this consider a potential sale of the land that the fire station sits on now as part of?
It is not in this facilities plan because we don't know the timing or the amount of that or the future uses of it. But if and when it is sold, it would go back to this fund and.
Stagger those? Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. I think we've already talked about this particular slide. So the franchise fee proposed, we've already talked a lot about this as well. So the residential is 1 going to 4. The commercial has 3 tiered structures, so it's small, medium, large. These are flat fees, and they would be proposed to increase proportionately with the residential increase. So, and I believe in your background, we did show what those rates would be.
Councilmember Workman?
Haley, and this is, again, for clarity and anybody that might be tuning into this, when we talk about residential, does that include dense, medium, and high-density residential? Or is that in a separate category?
I believe, so it has to do with how they are billed through the utility company, but yes, so if they have separate meters, they would be at the residential rate.
Okay.
If there is a facility that has 1 meter, and they are responsible for spreading the cost of utilities out to whomever is within their building, then it would be at the commercial rate.
And then there's 3 commercial rates, small, medium, and large. Is that based on square footage?
It's based on the utility company's definition of what those are, so it's usage rates. So it's not, they will fall into a category of small, medium, large based on that's how they define, how the utility companies define it. So it's a very, kind of getting back to our earlier discussion, it's a very simplistic rate structure, as opposed to the property tax, which is valuation based, and everybody is very specific on what the value. You will have properties of many values sort of lumped into the same category.
The reason I asked the question is because if, let's say one of, the new apartment buildings, each unit has their own meter. That's $4 per meter, or, it's an $8 franchise fee. That's gonna yield a higher amount than a large commercial building with 1 meter. If it's based on usage, I would think that a large apartment building would have a higher use because of the residents as opposed to, say, a storage facility that's just got the lights on and, you know, maintaining 65 degrees. And so that's, you know, I guess that's gonna impact residents differently depending on how they're defined, and it would be helpful to know that, you know, for either our lower income, high-density housing units or inversely the other ones, just to get some clarification on that, should we be asked about that in the future.
I believe they are typically, as from what they told us when we first implemented this, the utility companies, they are typically separately metered.
Okay.
And then the thing we don't know about commercial properties is that commercial properties can have more than one meter as well. So, but that's something that we don't know or can't control. But so it is a per meter charge. So a commercial property might have multiple gas meters and one electric meter, or they might have vice versa, or they might have multiple. We don't know that. And the utility companies they were very strong about wanting a flat fee. That's the typical franchise fee as opposed to based on usage. That's difficult for them to implement. And is not consistent with what other cities do, so.
So we think that as far as residential goes, those are generally individually metered units. And then everything else is gonna fall into one of those other three commercial categories. Okay.
And as it was described to me during the last process, these small ones are typically more of a small, can be more compared to a residential unit on the size-wise for a commercial. They're kind of a comparable before you get up to the medium size, and then the large would be more of an industrial.
The big giant boxes that are outside of those. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
And could we get what those commercial rates are?
They are in your background,
Could we call those out, please?
in the presentation.
Yes.
Okay. Next. Oh, you just want me to speak?
Yes, yep, yep. Yes, because, I mean, we're
Sorry,
calling out exactly
Yes.
what the residential is,
Yes.
so if we could do that for the commercial as well, that would be, I think, helpful.
So for commercial small is $12, the commercial medium is $40, and the commercial large is $180. So that's per month per meter. So with the residential going from 1 to 4, these were increased to the same percentages.
Okay, so for example, the small changes from X to X.
It changes from 3 to 12. And on the medium, it went from 10 to 40. And on the 180, it went, do that math in my head,
45, I think, yeah. 45 to 180.
45. Yeah, oh yeah, 45, yes, that is it.
Thank you, really appreciate that. Then our businesses can kind of hear
Yes.
where that's going to. Thank you.
And then as far as implementation goes, once you make the decision, it takes a bit there's some notification processes, there's a notification of Public Utilities Commission, and then they have to hit a billing period, so. Parks Capital Fund, we've talked about this as well, so we have, in 2019, some, the big number is really the Lake Marion Regional Trail in there that was budgeted revenues and expenditures. That will, you'll see that in a carry forward. That will not get done by the end of the year, but we just show it there as in and out. So the revenues will come along with it. There's a small portion of that project that is funded from the city. There is a gap in that project. when it comes, when the final funding happens, I think at this point in time, we're thinking it still needs some funding. Is that correct, Ryan?
It's the likely scenario. We'll know once we get bids, but we'll be working on a joint powers agreement with Dakota County they're aware we're cash strapped on trying to fund too much more of the trail.
Okay, no.
Just
And development fees are limited to improvements, park improvements, and so we keep track of that in this particular fund. So there are, as you can see, that green line is pretty high in the fund right now, and that is because we have some, we've been fortunate to have some park development fees coming in. We don't have projects for them yet, so they're set aside, and they will be identified.
Nice.
We talked about Nicollet Commons already, scope still developing.
Nice picture.
I'll try to keep this moving if that's all right with you. And then just what I was speaking to, we have a whole slide on that. The Infrastructure Trust Fund, the two sources in that fund are the MSA, which is state aid, and ITF levy. We did take out of the ITF levy the part that had been going to parks. So 10% was going to the Parks Capital Fund, and we moved that directly to the Parks Capital. So that fund, we're basically trying to match what we put into the improvement construction every year with what's available. And I'll let Ryan speak to the specifics on the highlights.
There's some more slides that maybe it'd just be best just to go to the next slide. And then
Okay.
So we have 3 contracts that are going to be proposed to go out. One is in the Central 13 area. I don't think, you probably don't want me to read off the streets at this point in time, but there is no street reconstruction this year, which is the total curb, total water main replacement. It's all either reclamation or rehabilitation. A lot of our funding for like water main replacement is going into Heather Hills Tower. So that's the concept behind that. And we have plenty of streets that are very much in need that don't need to have water main replaced. And then Southwest Burnsville will be our first year of going through resurfacing out there. You remember the whole process we went through. So we plan on getting some of those roads improved in 2020. This project is being developed now. We had some really positive news once again with Dakota County with their new cost share policy. The maximum percentage of the project that the city will have to pay is 25%. So that's going to very much help. We got a $2.6 million federal grant, and then Dakota County will cap our share at 25% of the costs. And then we still are compiling exactly how that's going to be funded, but we are pretty close at this point. By the time this thing is out, I'm very confident we can make this project go.
Super. Yes.
Nice.
And this one is on County 42. Dakota County is planning on studying all the way from Savage all the way to where it hooks into Highway 55 going to Hastings. And a lot of exercising to be done on multimodal, pedestrian, biking, that sort of thing. How can we cross the road? It's also just going to be on, do we need 6 lanes where we don't need it? They're going to try to find some low-hanging fruit to do some improvements near term, but a lot of the results likely are going to be, you're going to need some further study. Like, they aren't going to be able to solve 42 and Cedar with this study. They're going to have some significant extra that they'll have to really focus in. But we are a funding partner and a project partner with this, and they'll definitely be taking our traffic study that we're doing on Center Village into account. The project manager for this project is on our project management team, so it won't be forgotten.
And we talked about that. And then this just gives you some perspective on our enterprise funds. The majority of our enterprise funds are the utility funds, the water and sewer fund and the stormwater fund, which so the concept of enterprise funds is that they are fee-based. They are user fee-based. The people using water are the ones paying for the system. And then same with our recreational facilities, the Ice Center, Golf Course, and Ames Center. In the Water and Sewer Fund, I've mentioned a number of times in our other presentations that we're gonna be doing a utility rate study in 2020. We always do a utility rate study, but this is a much more comprehensive, long-term rate study as we look at the structure of our fixed and variable costs and as we're projecting out. So just issued an RFP to have a consultant help us with that. And then our big uses in the water fund is Heather Hills. I think that's on the next slide. And I'll let Mr. Peterson talk about that one, or Jeff.
Want to talk about these?
Mr. Riley?
Yeah, mentioned the utility rates, Heather Hills, rehab, that's full rehab of the exterior, interior coatings. It was done approximately 12 years ago, I think, somewhere along those lines, 12 to 15 years ago. And now it needs to be totally redone. Groundwater treatment plant repairs is actually a electrical repairs in the water treatment plant that was part of the groundwater treatment plant rehab project. We decided, the poor bids we got on that, we decided to not do that as part of that project. We rebudgeted the money and going to be doing it in 2020. And variable frequency drives are the drives that run the electrical motors, so electrical motors can fluctuate with water usage. We have several large ones of those at the water treatment plant. That's where the 350,000 is going also there.
Just for clarification, the 515 electrical, that's original equipment from 1970 or so, right?
Yep.
That's getting replaced, so.
I wonder what the cost was in 1970.
Yeah,
550.
55,000.
1970?
Still got fuses in there then?
Yeah, well, this is pretty big stuff, so they don't have fuses, but yeah.
And in the stormwater fund, we're including that in the utility rate study as well. And we're using fund balance. And I think fund balance had been built up, so it's not really as much of a concern that it's being used. It's available for use, so that is supplementing fees at this point.
Real quick, we've been studying the entire city for determining where our needs are in stormwater management. If we spend our money here, is it gonna prevent something major, a catastrophe from happening? And if we let this go, is that gonna be okay? So that's what our plan is on resiliency improvements, checking out the model and figuring out where we can best spend our money to either improve a situation that's pending or prevent something from happening. Park drainage improvements, is it Pahasapa Park, I believe, that is having some challenges right now. We always supplement the street improvements with drainage, catch basins, and those kinds of things. And sustainability plan update that is underway at this point.
Councilmember Worker.
And is this including the Black Dog Road area as far as water drainage? Or is that just one of those things where,
Could you elaborate a little more?
well, that road floods every year? Is there any consideration into that area as part of this plan, or is that something just kind of an accepted norm in that area?
Yeah, we could not possibly control the flooding
It's too
there.
close.
Yeah, it's just if it goes under, and then also we've turned that road over to Excel Energy.
Oh, that's right.
We really own up to we're on the very extreme east and west end of that now.
Okay.
So we end up having to make repairs, but there is no, we would want to spend some money armoring the banks, but there's no way we'll be able to flood-proof the road.
Okay. Thank you.
Could we ask Excel Energy to flood-proof the road, since they own it?
They sometimes have to flood-proof the plant,
Yeah.
and you should see how big of a
Yeah,
road
they've
that
already got
is.
experience in flood-proofing the
They got a
plant,
really
just
big,
extend it
long
down that road.
tower they could
So our
use.
park
Yep.
trail won't keep going underwater.
So the Ice Center Fund it has been consistently meeting operating costs with operating revenues. They fund most of their regular capital replacement through the ice center fund through the fees, but there is some challenges here, and with renting ice time and competition among ice centers and availability of ice. It's there's been a decrease in number of people participating in those types of programs. So it's one of the things we're watching, and we will adjust expenses with revenues as we go. But I think this is one of those key places where the decision that you've made to include major capital funding in the facilities fund versus this fund help this fund not need general fund support. So that would be the other option in here is that if it were funding all of those things, you would need some tax levy support in this fund in the future possibly. The Ames Center Fund has that funny little line hanging off the bottom there in the negatives. That's what I was talking about in the paying back of the loan. So it had owed money to the general fund, and we're showing that is going to go to zero. And their fund balance is able to maintain at a level where they can fund some of their capital replacement needs too. So basically this fund has now become operations and capital funding. It'll be much easier to be able to look at what are the needs of operating this particular fund without a lot of ins and outs that were in that particular fund. And they're moving into a stage now where there are some replacement needs. So they are, it's 10 years old and facilities start to need some things in there, so. And then as we look at the operating portion of this budget, they are meeting their operations, so meaning the actual things that are going on there are paying for themselves. The costs of staffing and maintenance and repairs and that sort of thing are being funded from the revenues. One thing to note, that the naming rights for the building are projected through 2023, so that original agreement goes through 2023. So that is the reason why you see a dip down in the fund balance there. The theater is still projected to go through 2028. And we are at the summary. It's been a long presentation, but this comes back to that one of the very first slides that I brought up. We believe that we've addressed the goals that we set forth at the beginning, was to keep us on using those sound financial policies, building a foundation for a sustainable future as we look out in the long term in making these decisions. And it maintains the consistent level of service. So we haven't made a lot of service changes in doing this budget, and high quality service and quality and efficiency. Oops, and that was the last slide.
Are there any questions?
Once there's no
City
questions.
Manager Lee.
I just wanted to clarify, Acting Mayor Gustafson and Council, I thought we had put it on the all-day work session, the proactive versus complaint-based, and I just wanted to kind of verify my memory, because sometimes it's faulty. So it looks like at the August work session, the council directed this to the 2020 all-day work session to discuss complaint-based method for code enforcement. So that's why I kept thinking, oh, we were working on it, but we weren't ready for it. So just point of clarification, if you still want information on the 26th, I'll work with Jenny to bring that forward, but that was a topic for the upcoming work session, or all-day work session.
I think we're good with moving it up, right?
Well, and I'll just mention that I think prior to what we saw tonight, I think that would have been sufficient, but if we're budgeting money for something that might resolve itself potentially,
The
then I
other-
would ask that we move it up.
Certainly, and the other piece is we could certainly, hold off on any personnel decisions until the council makes that policy decision on complaint-based code enforcement. So certainly wouldn't proceed until we have that clarity.
Maybe we'll get there on the 26th. Thank you for looking that up.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for the presentation. Great job. You guys do a lot of really good hard work on this, and I know you start right after this budget, start working on next year's budget, so it is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want budget-related for the 26th?
I didn't hear
The
anything
rest of it
tonight.
look okay. All right. All right.
That'll do it. All right, we're moving on to roundtable. And on roundtable, we're gonna talk about citizens' comments at council meetings, and Councilmember Keeley has asked this to be put on the roundtable.
Gosh, feels like it's been so long ago. I feel like we've already talked about it. I know that we have on our council agenda 10 minutes set aside, but I've never interpreted that as hard, a 10-minute hard rule. In fact, we've deviated from it so many times, that's why I got the impression it wasn't a hard and fast rule. And I don't want to see the council use it indiscretionately, depending on the situation. I think we are the people's house. I think we are elected by the people to listen to the people who come before us. And when I was acting mayor and we had a full house of people, I let everybody speak, and I didn't care if it was going to take the meeting 3 hours, or if that whole public comment period was going to end up being 90 minutes. I kind of feel like we as a council need to ensure that going forward, our meetings are structured as such that if people want to speak, they're allowed to speak, and that we do not have a repeat of the situation where we invoke a 10-minute rule when and if we want to, as opposed to letting people speak that come before us. And so, I witnessed Edina's meeting in their citizen comment period when I was watching the replay. And at no time did anyone they just said, all right, now it's time for the public comment period. They never said, all right, you only have 10 minutes, so hurry up. So I think we need to just set our policy to be the 10 minutes is nothing more than a guide. And that's it. Just something to put on the agenda, but maybe we need to augment that to say additional time will always be made for people who want to speak. Because ultimately, that's what we do 9 times out of 10.
I would agree with you, Dan. It's the years I've been on the council, when we had crowds, we let them speak, and you were around in the days when we were building the Performing Arts Center, and everybody that sat in this room, if they wanted to talk, got a chance to get up and talk, and we didn't shut them down. So I do want to know, for the council to talk about, because I agree people should be able to get them to speak, but do we want people to come in with full presentations and start taking up time to give us presentations on different subjects and that sort of thing? Or just kind of give us their input on a certain thing?
I don't, if they've put in the time and the effort to do something and that's their forum, I mean, unless it's like a land use application that would be appropriate to go through the channels that already exist. One thing that we always said at Planning Commission, and I think Elizabeth does a good job of this too, is if you're providing new information that we haven't heard yet, that's stressed quite a bit, which I think helps alleviate, repetitive discussion of the same issue over and over. But I think at the end of the day, we have a pretty good sense of what isn't appropriate for that slot, right?
Yep. And I'll echo that. I think it's okay to remind those that want to speak to bring something new, and it's not really necessarily productive to the end to just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. I think it's fair to remind people that they might still repeat something that was said, and that's okay, but it does make them think about, okay, here's what I really want to add on to what was already said. And that's just a constructive discussion and dialogue, but it's still being allowed to move forward. Right?
Kara?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think some, just general guidance of how to have a productive conversation, that's not a bad thing. I do think that people, they do get to come and they do get to speak. We're in all of these training things about how to be more welcoming and encourage people to come in and speak to us and interact with us and be part of government. So that would be a good thing. And not just the time, but the feeling that we're not supposed to respond or react to someone. Yeah, I'm not really down with that either. I mean, there are times when someone just wants to speak in front of you, and it's okay, thank you for that, because there really isn't anything you can or are going to act on at that moment. But there are times where people have come in, spoke in front of us, and we do respond to them, and we do start to take action or that kind of thing. And so I think a restatement that, we absolutely can respond back, interact, and if needed be, take action or ask staff to look up something or, whatever. That the expectation is not that we sit there silently. Because I don't have that expectation for me, so.
I don't have it for you either.
Yeah.
We made a policy decision on a public comment with our assessment policy.
Yeah, we did.
I mean, she came up and recommended this change, and we discussed it and ultimately made a decision during a public comment period, and I thought that was awesome. I thought that was a very productive use of the public forum.
Yeah.
That was good government.
Yeah.
That was really a good
Yes.
example of good government, responsive government. And we won't always do that, but
No.
we need to at least acknowledge what they said, maybe have some light discussion, ask a few questions, say, okay, this is probably best that, we have staff take it from here, work with you, and then you're welcome to come back again. We're not gonna be able to answer this question tonight because it's too big and involves too many things. But even then, I mean, if I was coming in front of council, if I got in my car, drove to City Hall, and came prepared to say something, a bunch of stone faces, and only one person saying, thank you, next, I feel like I'm dismissed. Like, okay, well, could you at least acknowledge what I just said, right? And maybe give me a little feedback? I think that's what we have a duty to do. So, and we've done it, right, in that situation, so.
So how do we mold that then? And so staff isn't, or is this even like a?
Do we create a policy on that? Or
Do we need to?
do we need to create a policy? Good
Acting
point.
Mayor Gustafson, to my knowledge, the only place where there's a 10-minute limitation is in that little flyer
Right.
that we have outside. I'm gonna look to Mac. I don't think there's any formal, there is a formal policy?
No, City Manager Lee is exactly right. It's just a guideline that we try to limit the citizen comments to 10 minutes so that it doesn't take up the bulk of the meeting time. And the only place that it's written is in the pamphlet for the people when how meetings work that we leave outside by the agendas. But the council is free to go as long as they want, anytime
So
they
we can
want.
just take it off
And
the
there's
pamphlet.
we could remove that
Yeah.
from the pamphlet when we revise it.
I think there's a group here that says, yeah, do that.
And Acting Mayor Gustafson, it's probably time to refresh the pamphlet anyway.
Yep.
So we'll take that into consideration and make that change.
I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, second on our agenda for the roundtable is the city response to data request. Councilmember Schultz.
Okay, so, looking at how we respond to data requests, and what our present policy is for getting those out in a timely manner. And I also understand that sometimes this gets complicated because, we're working with other agencies as well. but I do think we need to take a look at how we respond to those data requests, and if we need to have a default policy on this that is different from our current policy. And one example of a default policy, which I've seen in cities, that have adopted it, is if a data request comes in, it is automatically given out by X date unless there is an articulated specific reason why it isn't, and then there is a 1-week review period every week until that data request then is fulfilled. There may be times when we can't give the data out immediately when it hits that point, or we may have a prosecutor asking us to wait 1 more week because they have to interview another witness. And I think that that's understandable. But the default should be that we release the data, not that we hold the data for a longer period of time. I also think that there is a change in expectations that data is released sooner. Used to be acceptable and people understood if it was months and months before data was released. But now people are questioning why, with the systems that we have, it's not like we have to physically walk into buildings, we have to have people travel, we have, those kinds of situations, why decisions can't be made quicker. So that is something that I would like us to take up and explore further on. What is our current policy? Does it work? Does it need to change? And can we make it more responsive to residents when they request?
I think that's a good subject to take up. I'd like to also talk about our communications with those that do give us data requests, and to just
Very
make
much
them
so.
aware of what the process is, what's going on, and if another agency does have it, let them know the other agency, but we do that and
Right.
make sure that they know that we're paying attention to it all along, so that we care about what we're doing on that.
Agreed.
So, but I think
Very,
that
very-
you're asking to put it on the all-day work session, so,
I am.
council,
I'm fine with that, yeah.
I'll put it on the all-day work session. And we'll have a discussion about data requests, how our policy will be on that. All right, number 3 on our roundtable. City's vision on tourism, and that's Councilmember Workman.
So this came up in lieu of the presentation at our last meeting. I think this statement was made that it's been 13 years that we've been utilizing the CVB. I don't know the last
That's 14 years?
14.
Well, actually, more than that, it's 14 years that Amy's been there.
Okay.
So we've been with him quite a while.
People that have been here longer than me might be able to speak to this. I just don't know if this is something that's touched on or looked at often. I want to discuss what is the council's desires. What do we want to see out of the CVB? Are there things that we're looking for? What are our expectations of this organization? I'm not saying this as a slight to the current system, but is it worth examining what's been in place to see if maybe we have outcomes that we're looking for that maybe aren't being expressed as part of this organization?
I'm in favor of that.
Dan?
Yeah, I think it's a great all-day work session discussion, and the dynamics within the CVB industry have changed. The dynamics of the digital technologies that are available today to be used as marketing tools. A lot has changed, and the city is changing, and we have, different priorities and direction that we're going, and I think there's a lot of good discussion points within that umbrella that you just brought up about the CVB. So I think that's something we absolutely have to have on our all day.
All right. Melody, please put it on our all-day work session.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you.
Might be a 2-day, all-day work session.
We keep adding things on it, that might be.
Well, we pulled
Maybe.
one off and moved it up to.
We
next
did.
month, or later this month.
Yeah, we did get rid of one.
Okay, we're done with everything on the roundtable, so now it's reports on our advisory board. Dan?
Well, you want me to go first?
Why,
Okay, I'll go
yeah.
first. Did I report last month on the I-35 Solutions, the priority projects? And go through
did.
this? For some reason, I don't know how I did that if the meeting was on the 10th and our meeting was on the 15th. I'm sorry. I was reversing the calendar when I looked at it. MBTA board, no major updates. We did have our Met Council regional, our members actually present at our meeting, which was nice. They spoke a little bit. Our representative didn't have much really to throw in. It was really, do you have any questions? And the senior member, who I believe is the interim, possibly, do you know the name of the interim Met Council chair? For the stepping down, Ms. Slavic or whatever?
Yes, the name is.
I think she was there, because her name rang a bell. Anyway, our big issue at MBTA has been, the Met Council is proposing a change in a regional solicitation, and Ryan stepped out. He can speak more detailed about it, but it's been a subject matter. It's been a sore spot. The STA, the Suburban Transit Association, which is our lobbying group representing all the opt-outs, has been working on this, but there's a pot of money that is available in the budget cycle from the state that MVTA and other opt-outs submit projects. That could be expansion, testing lines, additional operating, et cetera, service, basically. And what the Met, in short, what the Met Council is proposing is giving certain arterial bus rapid transit routes a big chunk, access to a big chunk of that money, leaving a small part for everybody else to fight for. They currently do get, these arterial bus routes do get a decent amount of money, but codifying it into the policy eliminates the chance of MBTA or other opt-outs to ever get more than a slice of what's left. Where today, depending on the strength of the project, they might get a bigger piece, and the arterial routes wouldn't. Well, they want to sort of make it a little bit of a hard line where all this money goes to these arterial routes, and here's what's left for you to fight over for your expansions. That's not friendly to opt-outs, and the opt-outs haven't taken it that way, and so we're pushing back. So that's one of the biggest political issues that we're dealing with the Met Council. And as everybody knows, the Met Council is our source of funding, and it's also our source of competition. And so it's a very unusual and highly irregular arrangement in the state of Minnesota. And as an opt-out member of our opt-out board, it's not one that I would have ever supported, and wish there was a way for us to change the business model of the Met Council and separate it from being our competition and our source of funding. Let's see, I-35 we did. I just have a couple notes. Actually, I have a shout out for our outgoing, I guess, in January. Skip Nienhaus attended the Burnsville Chamber Public Policy meeting, and he brought with him a sheet to talk about the proposed liquor ordinance changes that we are now embarking on, which we're going to obviously hold a period of time in our council meeting to allow the stakeholders to speak about these proposed changes. It's a lot of really good moves and cleanup of our ordinance, and it takes that model, as everyone knows, that we created in the Burnsville Retail Center area and applies that to the whole city, and removes a lot of barriers. There's some impacts on our existing stakeholders, so I think it's important for us to allow everybody to have their time in front of us to talk about their concerns and or support. And he gave a great overview and brought this sheet with a lot of information on it, and discussed it with the Public Policy Committee. So thank you very much, Skip. That was a great presentation. It was very helpful. The Public Policy Committee is talking about the city budget next steps, the franchise fees next step, I did make them aware that today, we would be talking about all those things. So, they must be watching from home. I thought they'd be here. The one beauty of having a publicized meeting, right? You can just sit at home and watch. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kara?
Mine is actually meeting, Thursday, so catch me next time.
Will do just that. I'll have Elizabeth catch you next time.
Yep.
Vince?
I'm light on things. I don't have really anything to report on.
Okay, well, CVB, we had our budget discussions a few weeks ago, which we all approved at our last meeting. So we've gone through that. Dakota Broadband, we have a contract to look at, which we're getting, I think, November 4th meeting, is it, third meeting? Fourth meeting, so we'll all see that. And is Kara gonna be here from the DVB as well, do you know?
She is coming to a work session in January.
In January, okay.
Yes.
So
We
we'll
haven't
s-
invited her to the December meeting, but we could.
Okay. And then tomorrow is my meeting over at Dakota Broadband as well, so there'll be lots more to come on this in the next 2 months. And with that, I have nothing. Anybody else have anything?
We do not. I do not.
Greg?
I don't speak for Greg.
Desire to adjourn.
Should I
That's what we
adjourn the
have.
meeting?
It's a non-debatable motion.
Okay. We are adjourned.